I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue the story of the disappearance of Maura Murray. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Prosecutors. Today we are continuing our investigation into the disappearance of Maura Murray. My name is Brett. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to join my co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett. We are still in our respective shelter-in-places orders. I feel like we just need to say that each time so we remember for the future this time of social distancing.
It will be such a celebration when we can say to the audience, we are no longer sheltering in place. We are together again. I can't wait till that day comes.
But until then, we are being safe. I am still in my closet.
And I hope you get to come out of the closet soon, Alice.
Thank you, Brett.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I am still in the makeshift studio with the hole in my roof. Maybe one day I'll have a whole house again, but hey, we're blessed. We're healthy. I have a partial roof over my head. And we get to do this with you guys.
And all we want to do is to talk to you about Maura Murray.
Exactly. So Alice, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Brett. So yesterday we talked about kind of the background and beginning of the lead up to the disappearance of Maura Murray. But there's so much more to the story, as is evidenced by the fact that we barely got through an entire day of her life before we had to end the episode.
Yeah, I said, that this was going to be a multi-part story, and I wasn't lying.
Not at all. So, if you remember, we last talked about the night of February 6th when Maura was working at the security desk and her supervisor finds her in a catatonic state, sobbing, and all she said was, "My sister," and went home. And we ended with her, I guess with something that many people do, ending the night at 3:30 in the morning, eating Domino's pizza, or ordering Domino's pizza.
Yeah, I spent a lot of college nights ending with a Domino's pizza.
That's completely understandable. Tastes delicious then.
I used to work at a hotel, and if anybody ordered Domino's pizza, I got $1. It was like a kickback from Domino's.
Wait, really?
So obviously, yeah. So
wait, what kind of a hotel? Was it
called,
like an upscale hotel or like a motel?
Oh, no. Definitely not an upscale hotel. Like the kind of hotel where the ladies of the night would occasionally rent a room and ply their trade. That kind of hotel.
Brett, I had no idea.
A motel. It was more a motel than a hotel.
Okay, was this in college?
Yeah, this was in college. And Domino's, so if someone ordered a Domino's pizza, the delivery guy would always come by and give me $1, whether I was involved or not. So of course,
would you ever encourage Domino's deliveries?
Absolutely. If somebody called me and asked, like, where should I order pizza, I've always said Domino's. It works brilliantly.
Man, they are like, that's a really good plan, Domino's. I didn't know they did that sort of word of mouth advertising. Way to go, Domino's.
I don't know if it's a widespread thing or not.
So, we covered, I think, February 6th, the night, and we got into the early morning of Saturday morning. Now, something really interesting happened Saturday morning because Maura's dad, if you remember, Fred, withdraws $4,000 from multiple ATMs. So presumably he's driving around, kind of hitting the limits at each of these ATMs to withdraw $4,000 cash. And he comes to Amherst to buy Maura a new car. Now, she drove a Saturn, but it was about 8 years old at this point. It was a 1996 Saturn, and it's become kind of unreliable at this point. So she's been asking people for rides to class, and I presume she doesn't live very far from class, and so her car is quite unreliable that she kind of can't depend on it to get to class. Do you know anything about Saturns, Brett? Are they reliable cars? Because 8 years doesn't seem that old.
Good American-made cars. I think they're made in Tennessee. Anyway, my wife, I don't know if you knew this or not, but my wife owned a Saturn. So when I was in college and law school, she had a Saturn. And I mean, it had a lot of issues. It was about the same age as Maura's car when she owned it. And it does not surprise me at all that Maura was having these kind of problems with her Saturn. I remember one time a friend of mine and I borrowed my wife's car at the time, my girlfriend's car. I don't know where we were going to go, but we were driving through Boston and we were in one of those notorious Boston tunnels. And as we're sort of coming up around a curve, coming out of the tunnel, the car breaks down.
No.
And so we're literally broken down in the left lane of this tunnel.
That's terrifying.
And it's rush hour. So it's rush hour. So it's pretty slow. The traffic's pretty slow anyway. So it's not bad. And we call the tow service and we're like, hey, we tell them where we are and everything. And we're there for so long. And so rush hour starts to end and these cars are going faster and faster around the corner in this tunnel. And I'm just thinking somebody's going to slam into the back of us and kill us. Anyways, So
you're saying they're not super reliable cars?
They are not super reliable cars. They weren't super reliable cars. They don't exist anymore. But some people have expressed the same surprise that you did, that a relatively new car, would have these kind of problems. But it doesn't surprise me at all.
My first car was like a 15-year-old Nissan Altima, and I drove it for like almost a decade. And so that's why I was like, 8 years, that's a young, spring chick right there. But
yeah, I had a Toyota Camry that I drove for about that long, and it was the same thing. It was fine. It was great. It was a great car. But
we're not getting paid for any of these shout outs to Domino's or Camrys or Nissans, by the way. But if those companies
but
wanted
if Domino's
to,
is listening,
we'll take $1 for every pizza you make. If only.
Exactly.
But I mean, so back to this $4,000 and coming to buy her a car. As you may remember, we ended last episode with the fact that there had recently been a hit and run of a UMass student about a mile from where Maura was working. We're not saying necessarily this is why, but this is weird.
Isn't it strange? It's not strange that Maura's been having trouble with her car and you might want to buy another one. But if her father was going to drive all the way to Amherst, which I forget exactly where he lives in Massachusetts, but he certainly lives closer to Boston. So it's a couple hour drive at least out there. And he's going to help her buy a car and he's going to get $4,000 together. Why wait until the Saturday morning you're coming out there and you're going around to ATMs and withdrawing your limit to get this amount of money together? It's just
that makes no
strange
sense.
thing to do.
It seems like you found out that morning you needed to get a car. That's why you withdrew. And also, here's another thing. Some people may buy cars all cash. Some people buy houses all cash. I didn't have that kind of money when I was in college. And so I, had like payments on cars and whatnot. And so this is also interesting that he's taking out a bunch of cash to have a lot of cash on hand to buy a car.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's just another strange thing about this story. I mean, you got 24 hours, I guess, because it's Thursday to Friday night when the accident happens with Patrice Vassy. So you have Friday where I mean, who knows what the communications were back and forth with her dad. I mean, let's just imagine a world in which she got into this accident with Vassy. It would make more sense, I guess, for her father to come out on Friday to buy the car rather than waiting till Saturday. So I guess maybe you could say that, though it's also possible Maura wouldn't have told him immediately. She might have waited to try and figure out what to do.
So what we know about this whole car buying situation actually comes from Maura's sister, um, Julie. And keep this in mind, as Brett noted earlier, there's definitely a version of this story or a theory of what happened to Maura that her family believes. So, keep that in mind when we hear um, uh, things from her family. So her sister Julie says that Maura and her father had gone looking for cars, and they'd actually narrowed down to just a few vehicles that they planned on buying in the near future. But they don't yet buy the car, even though her dad had withdrawn all that money. Instead, that night, so we're still talking Saturday, Maura and her friend Kate, they have dinner with her dad. I guess that makes sense. Your dad comes into town. Maybe her dad takes them out to dinner. And then Maura and her friend leave to pick up some liquor for a party. And they drop off Maura's dad at his hotel room. So they have dinner together, and then I think Maura and her friend are planning on going to another party. Now, Maura, we do know, goes to this party. And I should note, she is actually driving her dad's car this evening. So she's not driving her Saturn, and they have not yet bought a new car. So she is driving her dad's brand new Toyota Corolla that night. So I guess her dad lets her take the car, brand new car, to go to the party. She goes to the party, and she leaves around 2:30 in the morning. It's about closing time, I guess. In other words, she's been there for a while. She goes after dinner and stays several hours and has brought liquor. Sometime after that, we're not exactly sure when, but again, we're talking early hours of now Sunday morning now. While Maura is driving towards her dad's motel where he's staying, she actually ends up crashing her dad's car. So again, this is his brand new Toyota Corolla into a guardrail on Route 9 in Hadley, Massachusetts. And she does some significant damage on it. She incurs it's like an $8,000 in damages, which for a brand new car, that's not good news. And it's so much damage, actually, that the insurance company later considers this brand new car completely totaled. We don't know much about that crash because there's really no charges or citations filed by the police officer who shows up that night responding to the crash. We don't know if the cop did a sobriety test or any test of that sort. And we do know that there's a tow truck that has to come out because, remember, the car is basically totaled. And the tow truck driver drives Maura to her dad's hotel, where she then ends up staying the rest of the night, which is not that long because at 5 a.m., so probably just a couple hours after she gets there after the crash, Maura calls her boyfriend. We don't know what they talk about. We just know that she calls her boyfriend.
This is another one of those nights. I don't know if Maura slept during the day or what, but this is another night where Maura's not getting a lot of sleep. And I don't know how significant that is, as we talk more about what happened, but she's out at a party until 2:30 in the morning. She gets into an accident, and if you've ever been in an accident, it takes a while to clear the scene. I mean, it takes a while before you can leave. She gets to the hotel. She's calling her boyfriend at 5. There's not a lot of rest going on here.
Sounds like she probably just showed up at the hotel, maybe like showered off, shook it off a little. I've been in a car accident before. I'm pretty shaken afterwards. I probably couldn't fall asleep after, a car accident. Yeah, so she calls him at 5 a.m. We don't know much about the rest of that day. All we know is that later that night, so the entire day passes by. We really don't know what happens, except at 11:26 that night on Sunday. We're now into Sunday, February 8th, the day before Maura disappears. Her dad calls Maura and reminds her she needs to pick up some accident forms, presumably to file for her insurance claims for the car that she has totaled. And I also note here that they still haven't bought a car.
We still haven't bought a car. And this day is another one of those, days that gets picked apart extensively. And there are a lot of podcasts that spend an entire episode on this day, an entire episode on aspects of this day. So we can break it down a little bit. This party that she attends with Kate, going back to James Renner. James Renner is obsessed with this party. He thinks this party is very significant. He thinks Kate is hiding something. It's called a party. It was more like a small gathering in a dorm. Our understanding is we're talking a handful of people here. Maura's close friends, basically.
And we should note Kate is one of her closest friends.
Yes, Kate Markopoulos was her best friend, I guess, at the time. And there's dispute about how much Maura drank. I mean, look, I don't know Maura. It seems like Maura, like most people in college, like to drink. It would surprise me if she was there until 2:30 in the morning and didn't have multiple drinks. I mean, she stopped to pick up liquor for a reason. So
but I
when
also
she
note
leaves
that
this party,
the night before, whether she was actually upset about her sister or not, she's probably, it's in her mind that her sister does struggle with alcohol addiction and just left rehab and stopped to buy alcohol. So how that affected her, I don't know, but that's got to be prescient in your mind that this is happening to your sister.
And I think the best argument for her not having been drunk, or at least that drunk, if you get into a single car accident at essentially 3 o'clock in the morning, when the police respond, they're gonna suspect, it's a college campus, they're gonna suspect some alcohol. And it's surprising to me, it would be very surprising to me if she had been drinking, if the police officer didn't conduct some sort of sobriety test.
So I'll note one thing about that. I mean, you went to law school in Massachusetts, so you may know this area better than I do. But I went to a pretty big party school for college, and it was a small college, a small liberal arts college as well, in a small town. I'm talking like 8,000 people. More cows than people is what people always joke. And there was a lot of drinking, irresponsible drinking, and unfortunately there was drinking and driving. But the people who went to this school typically came from, well-to-do families, and they planned to go somewhere with their lives, and they recognized that having any sort of an alcohol citation or DUI or DWI would be very bad for their record. And so we always suspected that the cops were a little bit easy on some of the students that I went to school with in terms of accidents where alcohol may have played a role. And we would always be surprised when really they didn't get any sort of a citation. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that was always the case, because I've actually had to bail a number of friends out of jail for, being drunk in public. But there was always talk sometimes on campus that, the cops recognized that these students may have just been being stupid and they were just kids and mistakes are allowed. And if it wasn't too bad of an accident, maybe just to not make a big deal of it. So I don't know anything about Amherst, but I did go to a small liberal arts school where the cops knew the school well.
I guess the thing that makes me doubt that is this seems like it actually was a pretty bad accident. I mean, who knows, right? You got a car, $8,000 worth of $8,000 worth of damage. If your bumper gets hit in the wrong way, it may not look bad, but they have to replace the whole thing, and that's why it costs so much. So it's possible that this accident isn't as bad as it sounds. And if that were the case, then yeah, I could see the cop sort of looking the other way. I mean, who knows? It's just officer to officer. Some officers, where I went to college, it was hit or miss. I mean, I had this one cop that I knew, And at least 3 different times he could have arrested me for various things, not drunk driving.
So did you get
But
to know him because of these times where he did not arrest you?
no, I had gotten to know him. He was our cop, our community-oriented police officer.
Okay.
And so I'd gotten to know him through that. And then, stupid things like we were shooting fireworks and it's illegal to shoot fireworks in the city and the police show up. And who is it? It's him. There was one time we were burning a couch for reasons that are neither here nor there. And a cop shows up and it's him. And he had actually called another officer and he's like, God, I wish I knew it was you guys before I called this guy. So he had to work that out with this other officer to get the other officer to leave. So, if he had been a stickler for the rules, he could have hit us up several times. It's really difficult to say. I think one thing we can say for certain, people speculate that there was going to be some kind of legal consequences for this. Maura she was on probation for her credit card issues. And so some people say, she got in that wreck, there was going to be legal consequences. Her probation could be violated. She could go to jail, all this other stuff. No, none of that was going to happen. If the police officer didn't give her a citation that night, it's not like they're conducting some in-depth investigation into whether or not she was drunk and they're going to issue an arrest warrant later on. She got away with this. If there was anything to get away with, she got away with it. Did it shake her up?
You can't really
Sure.
backdate reports. You have to make them at the time that they occur.
Exactly. So I think we can put that to bed. I think it probably did shake her up. I think she probably was pretty upset. Her father was obviously very upset with her. But by that night, her dad had moved on to the sort of technical parts of this. We got to get the documents. We got to get the reports so we can do the insurance and et cetera, et cetera. So it obviously was a bad thing, but maybe not as significant as some people make it out to be. Now, what it is, and one thing that's strange, or I think it's strange, I don't know, we'll see what you think. Why did she decide to go to her dad's hotel room that night? It was very late. Obviously, it was 2:30 in the morning. My understanding is they were supposed to meet the next morning. She wasn't supposed to go out there. This wasn't something where her dad was like, hey, after your, 5-hour drinking party, drive the car back to me. She could have just parked the car or left the car where it was parked, gone to her dorm room, gone to sleep and driven out there the next day. I don't know why she did that. This is one of those things that leads to speculation that something happened at that party that upset her so much that she wanted to see her father immediately. But that's pure speculation. We know nothing about this party, and the people who went to the party have never really talked about it.
And here's another thing. She shows up with Kate, but Kate's not in the car when she crashes the car. Now, that might not be that, noteworthy. Sometimes you drive people to parties and you don't leave with them, but typically, when I drove a friend to a party, I would leave with them.
I think the party was in the same building where Kate had her dorm room. So I think that's the explanation for that.
But she's alone when she crashes.
Yeah, and that's actually another thing, though. I mean, I've been to a lot of parties where I've had to take keys away from people if they were drunk. Obviously, not everybody does that. You wonder if if Maura was really drunk, if her friends would have just let her walk out of there and get in her car. Now, maybe they didn't know, but we just don't know anything about this. We just don't know anything about this party other than she went to it, and after it was over, she decided to go see her dad in the middle of the night, and she wrecked her car.
Yeah, so that we have the several days leading up to February 9th, 2004, the now infamous day of when Maura disappeared. So we're going to start with early that morning. So this is Monday, February 9th at 12 a.m. So at the very start of the day, and back to Brett saying Maura doesn't sleep, it appears. We know that Maura searches her personal computer for directions to the Berkshires. Do you say Berkshires or Berkshires? Can you tell I'm not from the Northeast?
I think it's the Berkshires, I think.
We're going to cut that part out. So she's looks for directions to the Berkshires in Lancaster, Vermont, and Burlington, Vermont. This isn't too far from where she is. And my understanding is she is familiar with this area. If you've ever been there, though, it is pretty remote. People go out there, especially in February. It's going to be very snowy. It's really cold. So later that day, so that was at 12 a.m. Who knows if she slept? Maybe not. But later that day, at 12:55 p.m., Maura looks into renting a vacation condo in North Conway, New Hampshire. And this is an area that her family frequently vacationed at, so she does know North Conway. And she calls this vacation condo there. The call, we know, lasts for about 3 minutes. And all we know is that the owner did not end up renting the condo to Maura. So she does not have a rental at this time. A couple minutes later, at 1 p.m., Maura emails her boyfriend saying, "I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today, though. Love you, stud." And that's it. We're not sure what she's referring to at this point, but obviously we will speculate a bit on what she's talking about. So around the time she sends this email, Maura then calls a Wakefield couple to ask about renting their Bartlett, New Hampshire condo. So she wasn't successful the first time around in renting a condo. She tries again. This condo is at the Seasons at the Attitash Resort. Have you ever been to these places, Brett?
Yeah, I've been to all these places. I've skied at all these places. I've been to North Conway.
You have. You are so fancy.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Boston, this is where we went skiing. We went one time to Maine, but for the most part, it was New Hampshire and Vermont, and the mountains right along the border between New Hampshire and Vermont. So yeah, I've skied all these places. I know all these places, and that's one thing I'm looking forward to talking about once we get into her driving up to these places.
Got it. So did you only, was it like what kind of a vacation place are these places? Are they for like families? Are they for law students, college students, like a party town? Can you set the scene a little? Because I've never actually been skiing up there.
So they're mostly more family oriented. So the ski resorts in Massachusetts, number one, are terrible for skiing. But they're much more accessible to the student population. So you're going to see a lot more students there. Places like Attitash, places like North Conway, places like Sunday River in Maine. I mean, these are much more the sort of ski towns as you imagine them in the Rockies. The big difference is the snow is really bad. It's ice. I mean, you're basically skiing on ice. There's no such thing as powder in any of these places. But they do have that sort of, ski town feel, family feel, restaurants and all that kind of stuff.
So is it going to be very expensive to rent one of these condos, or is it, since students can afford it, is it going to be, somewhat cost effective?
So based on the amount of money that it turns out Maura had in her bank account, I can't imagine how she would have afforded any of these places. I actually have found that skiing and staying in the Northeast is much more expensive than on the West Coast. I think there's a couple things going on there. I think there's just fewer places to go. Still a lot of people who want to go skiing. More upkeep is required just because the snow is more, the mountains aren't as high. You don't get as much natural snow. So I think everything is just more expensive about going to these places. And this is February, so this is still very much in season. Now, it is the middle of the week, so it's possible that she could get some kind of deal. And I think that's what she's looking for. I think that's why she's calling all these different places. She's looking for someone to say, "Oh yeah, I got a vacancy. There's no way I'm going to fill it unless you take it for half what I would normally charge."
Okay, so she calls the second place at 1 o'clock. 5 minutes later, she calls 1-800-GO-STOW, presumably to rent a room as well. This call lasts just about 5 minutes, and we know that she does not rent a room there either. So it sounds like she's kind of just dialing a bunch of places looking for somewhere to rent.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. She wants to go to the White Mountains. She wants to go to New Hampshire or Vermont, but she doesn't really care where she goes. And that is fairly typical up there. I don't know that I ever went to the same ski resort area twice. There's not a lot to differentiate them. So I don't think it's one of those things where her heart was set. She really wanted to go to North Conway, which is a beautiful place. Um, and obviously it's not, because she's just trying to find a place to go. I think she just wants to get away.
So we find out later that even though she's called 1-800-GHOST-STO, the phone systems were not operating properly. So likely when Maura called that number, she probably heard an automated recording along the lines of, not being able to get through to someone to book a room. So she calls 3 different places, seemingly does not rent anything. Not seemingly, she doesn't rent anything. And a few minutes after that call, at 1:13 p.m., Maura calls a classmate and she leaves a voice message. And so there's conflicting reports about what, but there seems to be a consensus among people that the voicemail is about returning some scrubs, or to have the classmate give her the assignment they had in that class. So it has something to do with either returning something or class. Or maybe she's making plans for missing class.
And if anybody knows the answer to this, that'd be great. I mean, one of the problems with Maura Murray, if you try and research Maura Murray, there is so much stuff out there and it's all conflicting. And all you can really do is build the best timeline you can and try and use the best information you can. So at the end of the day, who knows why she called this person? People make a big deal about her returning the scrubs. People who subscribe to a theory that she's going up there to kill herself. This is her like taking care of her business, and one of the loose ends was she needed to return these scrubs. Now, if on the other hand she's getting the assignments that she's going to have from this person, that tells a very different story. That seems like not the kind of thing you would do if you were going to commit suicide.
One thing that I've been thinking about when about all the uncertainty is it's a little bit strange that there's so much uncertainty about what happens in these voicemails, about whether she's sitting at the security desk or not, about whether she's crying or catatonic, all these sorts of things. And the thing about this story is there's lots of people around. She leaves a voicemail for someone. She's riding in a car with Kate. She sees her dad. She sits at a security desk where people are coming in and out. And, at first glance, I'm like, why are there so many unknowns when there are so many people touching this case? But the thing is, like we said at the beginning of the Maura Murray episode, is none of this is significant at the time. Think how many voicemails you've received and can't remember what they say because it's not eventful at the time. Or how many people you may see coming in and out of the library if you're sitting at the library at the security desk, or just in the library, or wherever you're standing. None of this is significant at the time. And people's memories become faulty very quickly. I deal with these sorts of arguments all the time from defense counsel, actually, when I have, say, a police officer testifying on the stand. I often hear the argument, well, that arrest occurred months or years ago, and all this research shows that people think they can remember things, but in fact the amount of inaccuracy in memory is incredibly high, much more than some say 80%. So you can't rely even on someone's sworn testimony, because they may think they remember, but in fact science shows that people don't remember things well.
And the weirdest thing I've always found about that research is there's some research that says the more significant the event ends up being that you're trying to remember about, the worse your memory is. Now, I would think it'd be the opposite of that, but apparently people they're trying to remember so hard, and their mind sort of supplies things for them to remember. In this case, like you said, it was insignificant at the time. Even, I'm sure, immediately after she disappeared, it was insignificant. But over the last 16 years, it has attained this sort of monumental status as the greatest missing person case in America, right? So it's not surprising that people who are racking their brains 16 years later often can't remember exactly what happened, or we get conflicting reports, or we're not actually hearing from the person. We're hearing from the person who heard from the person. So we have a case here where some people say she's returning scrubs. Some people say she's asking for assignments. Maybe she did both. Maybe she returned the scrubs to this person and she asked for assignments from someone else, and the two have been conflated. It's hard to say 16 years later.
Right. So we've covered about the first half of the day pretty
And
quickly.
before we move on, I just want to go back to the Love You Stud email.
Oh, yes.
I don't think we can read a whole lot into this other than I think it's perfectly natural for Maura to be upset the next day that she wrecked her dad's car. I know I would be just crushed if I did that. I would feel so awful about it. I can't even imagine how bad I would feel.
A brand new car.
Yeah, your dad's come down. He's going to buy you a car. He's letting you borrow, his car for one night. And what do? You total it. It's just, God, that would be crushing. And we know that Maura was very close to her father. She craved approval from him. This had to be a huge blow for her. Even if you put aside any conspiracy about this, put aside the drinking or anything, just if it was, she was stone cold sober and wrecked that car, she would have felt terrible about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember actually clearly my first car accident, and it was very minor. I was in high school and I backed into a car. So no one got hurt. Damage wasn't even that bad. And I remember feeling like a failure, that I let down my parents, that it kind of crushed my self-esteem.
Yeah.
Even though by all accounts it was perfectly fine. Like insurance was going to cover it. No one was hurt. It was an honest mistake. I was a, newish driver and I forgot to check my rearview mirror, and a car typically did not park on the street where I was backing out of. But I remember feeling just devastated. And that was my own car.
Yeah. I remember my first speeding ticket was the same way. I felt just awful about it, just terrible. Now, Maura had a few more run-ins with the law than I had at that point, but I'm sure she still felt awful that she had totaled her dad's car.
And, she's saying, I got your messages, but, we know that from her phone logs, she's talked to him a good bit over the past few days. So it's not like she's ignored his calls for a long time or anything like that. She may have been busy and he just left some voicemails for her.
Yeah, I think her phone records show that on that Sunday that we were talking about, how not a whole lot happened, that she didn't make really any phone calls. And I think essentially he was calling her and she just wasn't calling him back, and probably because she still felt awful about the fact she wrecked her dad's car.
Yeah. And the Love Ya Stud, it's Love Ya, YA stud. Like it's honestly pretty lighthearted. She doesn't sound upset. We don't know. I mean, this is just text. We don't know her inflection or anything, but that sort of a sign off does seem pretty lighthearted.
Right.
Okay, so after making all these calls, trying to find a rental, and then that elusive voicemail to a classmate at 1:24 p.m. So we're talking about a short time frame here. Maura emails her nursing school supervisor that she's going to be out of town for a week due to a death in the family. We now know that that's actually not true, but basically she's making preparations for her being out of town, and so that people don't think it's strange that she's out of town. And she says to her supervisor that she'll be in contact when she returns.
So what do you think about this? Like, how does that strike you?
She's just saying a week. I mean, if you've had a tough time and your plan is just go get away for a little bit, it makes sense to cover your tracks a little bit so people don't come, obviously people will be worried about you if you don't show up to class, if, you're not around. I don't necessarily think this means that, for sure she was going to go kill herself or anything like that. I think it just means that she plans to get away and doesn't want anyone following her or suspecting her or talking to her, really. She's buying herself time to be alone.
Do you think it's it's pretty, I don't know. This may just be me and maybe I'm just weird. It feels extreme to me to say there's been a death in the family. To be that specific, not just I need to be out of town to take care of something, but we've had a death in the family.
Here's the thing. I thought about why a death in the family. And remember, I was a peer counselor in college. The thing with a death in the family is everyone will feel sorry for you. So there's immediately like sympathy for you. And also, people typically don't ask many questions because our culture really doesn't like death. So we don't ask a lot of details about who it is, how close were you, how did they die, in case that's going to make someone upset. And so most often I have seen people who lie, and this is again when I was a peer counselor. I'm like, I think you're BSing me. They'll say, if there's a death in the family, it's a grandma, and then the next time I ask them, it's changed. I'm like, I knew you were lying. But typically I have found that people don't really push and want details about a death in the family. They just automatically go to the sympathy. I'm so sorry. Take all the time you need. And they don't bug you about
So
it.
do you think it says anything about Maura Murray and her character? I mean, if you're sort of trying to build
Yeah, to lie that easily.
yeah, exactly. That you could lie that easily about something that serious. If you're trying to build some sort of character profile of Maura Murray, you're thinking about victimology and the kind of person she was. I mean, I don't want to go overboard here, and condemn Maura Murray based on this or anything else. But do you think it says something about her?
I do. So first, if this were standalone, she didn't have any other history of stealing or anything like that, and she just flat out says this, I would think it's a little bit weird. But the fact that she, steals from Fort Knox a small amount, she, then kind of has all this little bit of drama around her life, just this low level current of drama, totaling her dad's car, her own car doesn't work really well, stealing a credit card number and buying food, that sort of thing. And then being the type of person who would be sobbing at her work. Those sorts of things paint a picture for me of someone who kind of low level drama. That girl who just has a bit of drama. It could be a guy too, but in this case, she's a girl, a woman. I've known those types of people, and they are able to kind of lie without thinking much about it. I don't think they're pathological or anything, but I do think maybe she has this sort of drama around her.
Yeah. And I think it's just one of those things as we are inching closer and closer to the day of her disappearance. Well, we're on the day of her disappearance, but to her actual disappearance. I think it's just one of those things to keep in the back of your mind. Like you said, this is just the latest in a series of strange things. I mean, strange might not even be the right word, that Maura has done. And look, her family will say, and I agree with them 100%, that people are cherry picking the very worst moments in Maura's life and trying to build something out of that and ignoring everything else about her. I get that. But frankly, this isn't as significant as stealing the credit card or stealing from Fort Knox. And that almost makes it worse because it seems so pedestrian for her to tell this whopper of a lie about someone in her family dying, and she just does it without a second thought.
Right. I mean, it's coming like minutes after she calls a rental place. It's almost like she's just taking off things like, no big deal. I'm just going to tell a lie. It's not even to her a lie almost. It's just like on her list of to do. Got to get out of, classes. Check.
And another thing about this is we're just sort of building a psychological profile, like you just said. This is minutes after her calling all these places, trying to find a place to stay. She hasn't found a place. So apparently she has decided she's going up there, come hell or high water, even if she has nowhere to go. And she's just sealed the deal right here. This is immediately after failing to find a place. She's sending out that email saying somebody died. She's going somewhere now because you can't explain that. You can't cancel the death. She's going to have to deal with that when she comes back.
But I think this goes along with what you were saying. She didn't have her mindset on going anywhere in particular. She just wanted to go.
Right.
And she was going to go no matter where it was, or really, apparently, if she even had a place.
Right. Exactly.
After she tells this, what we now know as a lie, at 2:18 p.m., Maura calls her boyfriend. Remember, she had sent an email about an hour and a half earlier, with the love you stud. She calls her boyfriend and leaves a message where she promises that they would talk later. The call lasted about a minute, and we know that Billy did not answer because, now this is kind of strange. He was actually on the phone with Maura's friend Kate. Remember Kate? She was the one who rode with Maura to the party the night she wrecked her dad's new car.
I think this is the weirdest thing.
This is super weird because, okay, so cell phones back then, maybe you can't see who's calling in, but you know there's a beep in, and he presumably has been calling her all day and does not hear from her. And if he's like anxiously waiting from her, if he gets a busy signal, like not busy signal, but like a incoming call while he's on the call, I would think that you'd switch over thinking it's her or making sure it's not her.
Yeah, and by this time, I mean, this is 2000, what is this, 2004, 2003, 2004?
Yeah.
He definitely would have known it was her calling him. And, your best case scenario is he's talking to Kate because he's worried about Maura and is looking for her. I mean, that's really your best case scenario.
Now, I'll add one other thing to make Billy sound good. So there definitely is that. Or he's called, so he's gotten the email, so he knows that Kate is safe, right? That she's okay. She just doesn't feel like talking. And he gets the email from Maura, knows that Maura's okay. So he's not worried about her whereabouts, but he calls Kate because he's like worried about how she's doing after the accident or something along those lines. And my thought is, if Kate tells him something that he wants to hear more about, and so he's like, oh, wait, I see that she's calling in, but finish what you're telling me first.
And so I don't know if this makes me a weird person or not, but I don't think I have ever called a girlfriend's friend. I can't think, and who knows, right? Like trying to think back 20 years ago to when I had girlfriends. But I can't think of a time when I called the friend of my girlfriend for really any reason. I don't even know that I would have had their numbers. And I don't know that Billy knew Kate outside of Maura. Billy went to West Point, so I don't know how much he was in with this Amherst crew. But I don't know. I mean, it's probably completely innocuous. It doesn't mean anything. But to me, it just seems strange. It seems like a strange thing.
So, Brett, why do you think it's so strange? What are you trying to say about Billy and Kate?
I just feel like if I were calling Kate, I'm just trying to put myself into like player Billy's shoes, right? If I were calling Kate, the real reason I'm calling Kate is because I want to talk to Kate. Maybe I'm using Maura as an excuse, but really I want to talk to Kate. Like I've got something for Kate. Maybe I met Kate last time I was up there to see Maura. I don't know. I just don't think that he would call Kate just to talk to Kate.
That's a really good perspective, that we bring different perspectives, because you as a guy will say that you actually want to talk to Kate. I will say and that could be true. I don't know. I will say the only time that I've had a guy call me asking me something about their significant other who is my friend. So if I'm in Kate's shoes, they're calling about their girlfriend, was when they were really worried about them for some reason along the lines of like, they're going through something, or there's some drama. Again, this kind of goes back to the drama thing. And this doesn't happen often. It's not like I regularly talk to my friends' boyfriends or spouses. But thinking back to college, the only time that would happen is if my friend was kind of a high maintenance kind of drama queen and the boyfriend needed some help dealing with it.
And look, that makes perfect sense here. She just got in that wreck. She talked to Billy at who knows what time o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. Billy was probably, Billy's out in the military. He's probably got drill at 5:30 and is wishing he could get a little bit more sleep. And Maura's calling him, losing her mind, freaking out about this wreck. So it makes sense that he would call Kate to make sure she's okay. I mean, that does make sense. And I'm probably making too much out of it. It just struck me as very strange.
But you know what? I do agree. It's a little bit weird that he would have Kate's number because the situations where I'm talking about where I have a friend's boyfriend call me, it's because we're all friends. So we independently know each other. There's a reason for them to have my phone number. So I'll also give you credence there.
Right. And then the next thing that happens is weird too.
Right. So Billy doesn't pick up the phone when Maura calls, but then just a couple minutes later. So remember, Maura calls Billy at 2:18. He doesn't pick up. But then at 2:21, at 2:22, and at 2:24, so in quick succession, Billy calls Maura's phone 3 times, and she does not answer. This is just minutes after she called.
I'm gonna give my guy's perspective.
Oh yeah, give me your
guy.
Why call that many times? And what's he doing?
So, and I guess it's my guy's perspective from the Maura side of this. So I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody and the relationship was kind of coming to an end and you were kind of tired of them, but you haven't gotten rid of them yet. And so you're sort of like, you're skidding to an end, if that makes sense, but you got to interact with them. And so, you're Maura and you got to call him. And when you call, you are hoping it goes to voicemail because you don't want to talk to him. You got to call him, but you're hoping it goes to voicemail. And then when it does, you leave your message and now you've pinged him. You've done your thing. So you don't want to talk to him.
You've done your duty. You don't have to do more.
Exactly. And so when he calls you back, you're not gonna answer. You're gonna ignore that because you've done your thing. You've called. You've left your message. Who knows why you're not answering? But you don't actually want to talk to him. And I feel like that's what Maura is doing here. And I guess this lends some credence to the theory that Billy is really worried about Maura. So when he realizes he misses her call, he's trying to get back in touch with her. And he knows she literally just called him. She has to have the phone still. And so he's calling, boom, 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 and no answer.
Yeah. So, don't know why she doesn't pick up, but she doesn't. And then just about half an hour later at 3:00, Maura leaves campus in her black Saturn. That Saturn that wasn't even trusty enough to get her to class. And she heads toward the White Mountains in New Hampshire, just over the Massachusetts border. So this all happens pretty quickly. She starts calling places at 1 p.m. and leaves by 3 p.m. And she has not rented a place by the time she leaves campus. So we find this out later, but police will later will later state that Maura's dorm room appears packed, that her belongings were all in boxes, the art has been removed from the walls, or at least the art's not on the walls, and her drawers are empty. So it looks like her dorm room is packed up. And that there's an email to her boyfriend indicating there's trouble in their relationship. Specifically that Billy apparently had cheated on her. And this email was printed out and left on top of her packed boxes. Now, there probably is another way to read this too, because some sources argue that this is the beginning of a semester because we're early February and Maura may never have actually unpacked her boxes when she moved into the dorm room, since it was the beginning of the semester. I don't know about this. It's hard to live straight out of boxes even for a day and not make it look a little bit lived into. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You have to change into some clothes, and I've been a little bit lazy about unpacking boxes because I've lived in like 10 places in 10 years. But even after a couple days of living there, some things are in the laundry hamper, or the things I use all the time, like toiletries, are going to be out.
Right.
We don't know, except that her room is not unpacked. The art, I can see that.
And this is just yet another one of those things that people argue endlessly over, about what the actual state of her room was, and whether, and this whole, I guess Amherst was on the semester system, so they started a little later than, like I started January 2nd or January 3rd or something in college. That's when classes started. They started right after the new year. Apparently Amherst started later, so it really was at the beginning of the semester.
We know she was there at least Thursday, so that's at least 4 or 5 days, which again, what I was saying is if you've been there for a couple days, at least it looks a little more lived into.
And another thing I don't know and has never been clear to me, and I've never been able to nail down, did she move rooms? Because
Right.
it's February, not August. So was there a reason she would have packed up everything at the end of the semester, only to unpack it in February? I don't get that. I don't understand that part of it.
I certainly didn't do that. I stayed in the same room from for the whole academic year. So when I went home for the Christmas holidays, I definitely didn't pack up my whole
Right.
room.
And I'm sure, somebody can email us about this. Look, if you're listening to this, you probably know as much or more about it than we do because people are obsessed with this case. But if you know the answer to those questions, please hit us up with them. But the whole thing has always struck me as strange. The email itself it's not a recent email. It's from like either a few months or maybe even a year earlier, about, Billy had cheated on her and they were sort of working through that. I don't know why you'd print that email out. I know it's 2004 and I know people treated email differently then than they do now, but I don't remember printing out a lot of emails. So why are you printing that email? Now, the people in the suicide camp,
And leaving it behind.
yeah, the people in the suicide camp say she packed up her room to make it easier on her family, and she left that email so Billy would know this is one of the reasons I did what I did. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Really, who knows? But what we do know is 30 minutes after leaving campus at 3:30 p.m., Maura withdraws $280 from an ATM, which we now know is almost all of the money from her account, leaving only $16 behind. So like what we were talking about earlier, it's not like she had a ton of money in her account. Probably, $280 is not probably going to pay for a week, certainly not a week's worth of a condo at a ski resort during peak season. But she withdraws that money and she stops at a liquor store. And we do have surveillance images indicating that Maura was alone at these stops. She was by herself. And we know that Maura buys $40 worth of liquor, including Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua, vodka, and a box of Franzia wine.
Yeah, and she also got some of those like Seagram's wine coolers or whatever, the blue ones, which they found later as well. But yeah, I mean, basically, she's buying. It looks like she's gonna make some White Russians, maybe,
And cheap
or
wine.
Black Russians if she doesn't have any cream, and a box of wine, a box of wine.
Which is like cheap wine, the kind that gives you like a wine headache.
Oh yeah, it doesn't get any cheaper than a box of Franzia wine. I mean, that is as low. I mean, of the $40, that was what, $1.50 of it,
Maybe $1.50. We would have. I haven't seen Franzia wine since college, actually.
No, I haven't either. I don't know that I've seen Franzia wine since high school.
Well, you had a classier college experience than I did, apparently.
No, it was less classy because we didn't drink wine. But though questionable whether or not Natty Light is more classy than Franzia wine. I don't think it's significant that she took most of her money out of her ATM just because she didn't have that much. And I know, when I was in college and all my friends were in college and we were living paycheck to paycheck, as it were, we often didn't have any money in our bank account. And she's going out on this trip. This is probably the biggest thing she's going to do for a while. It's not surprising that she would take that money. And I don't think it's significant in any way. Like, oh, she's now got all her resources to go do whatever she's going to do. And part of that's just because she didn't have money resources. So I don't know exactly what amazing thing she could do on $280.
But I do think it's significant that she takes her broken down car that she doesn't even trust to get to class in to drive into the snow to the White Mountains.
It's insane. It's insane.
That is
this
insane.
is, we're talking about, when we talked about bad decisions that Maura has made, and this one is inexplicable. Particularly for someone who knew the area. She is not some tourist who's never been to the White Mountains. She and her family spent tons of time in the White Mountains. This was a place she felt comfortable. This was a place she felt at home. And the fact that she took that car up those roads, I mean, we're going to talk about this more tomorrow when we talk about the actual accident, but I have driven a Saturn up those exact same roads, and you know, you are taking your life into your own hands doing that. And it is just not surprising to me that things ended up the way they did. But it is certainly just yet another awful decision that she is making.
But you know what this says to me, though? She really was desperate to leave town, even if it meant bad decisions. She was calling places, you know, one after another. She didn't find a place to rent, didn't care, left anyway. She probably had no other means of leaving. This was her car, and she, you know, had totaled her dad's car, and her dad's not there anymore. And she plans to leave for longer than a few hours. You know, she says that she's going to be gone for the week. So she probably can't just borrow someone's car for that. So I think this reads to me someone who's just, I don't even care anymore. I just got to get out of here.
Right. And when you think about what happened and why she's doing what she's doing, I think this goes, look, and I get it. The family doesn't want to hear anything bad about Maura, and they don't want to focus on anything negative about her. And they have said 1,000 times that all they care about is what happened that night in New Hampshire. And I get that. But I think it is a mistake to ignore what was going on with her beforehand, because, like you said, one of two things is true. Either Maura is really not thinking clearly and is making really bad decision after really bad decision, and she's just making bad decisions, or for some reason she is desperate, and that desperation is driving her to do these things, and they're not bad decisions. They're actually good decisions given the circumstance that she's in. Either way, Maura, she's in danger. She doesn't know it, but she's in danger because the decisions she's making are putting her in a situation where something terrible can happen. So we've talked a lot today. We've got you to the point where the next thing that happens is the accident that leads to Maura's disappearance. We're going to stop here for now. In our next episode, we're going to talk about that accident. We're going to talk about the timeline. We're going to talk about the people who saw Maura, when they saw her, how much time elapsed between the accident and the last time she was seen. We're going to explain some of the weird things that happened that night. We're going to talk about some of the anomalies. We're going to talk about the witnesses. And hopefully, when we finish that discussion, you're going to understand why, if you don't already, why this story has captivated so many people for the last 15 years. But until then, Alice, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. I hope everything is great over at your house.
My closet is still wonderful.
I look forward to the day when we can do this together again.
May it be soon.
May it be soon. But, you know, for now, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
So really quick, now that you've mixed like 3 of the episodes, any tips, any notes on how we can make it better? I can speak slower and lower.